Hello guys, in this video we're going to be talking about the Shipment Expression 2 functions add-on that I made for Stealth Roleplay DarkRP server. What we're going to be going over is the functions this adds and how they can be implemented and how they work. Okay, so to start off, let's take a look at the functions it adds. So it adds a function called isShipment, and you have to give it an initial entity. It returns either a 1 if the entity is a shipment, or returns a 0 if the entity is not a shipment. We have shipment init was used. This basically initializes these three functions. This basically initializes these three functions right here. The shipment was used player, and shipment was used entity. In this, you should always, as you can see in the description, you should always use this function in the start of the script if you are planning on using the shipment was used functions. And this returns a 1 if they were successfully initialized, and or it returns a 0 if they weren't. So after you've used this, you can proceed to using shipment was used, which basically returns 1 if the chip was executed due to a shipment, due to one of your shipments being used, and if it returns a 0, it means that the nothing was used. Yeah. Then we have shipment used player. It basically returns the entity player, or returns a null, which is equivalent to a no entity. So either returns the player or it returns the basically an empty entity. So this can only be called if this was initially called. And then we have shipment was used entity. It basically returns the shipment entity, or returns a no entity, an empty entity. And then we have these functions here. Let's start off with use and use ship. So if you give use ship as a function that basically allows you to use your shipment. And this is restricted to only your shipments. So the owner of the shipment can only use this function on the shipments. You have to give it the shipment entity as the initial. And it returns a 1 if it was used successfully, or returns a 0 if it wasn't. The same goes for shipment use ship. It returns a 1 if the whole shipment was used successfully. So this function uses the whole shipment, aka the rest of the weapons inside the shipment. Then we have shipment name. It basically outputs the string, the name of the shipment. So if you have a shipment of AK-74, so it's going to output AK-74. Or returns a nil, which is equivalent to an empty string. Then we have model, same thing, returns a string, the model, or returns an empty string. And then we have shipment owner. It returns the entity owner of the shipment. So it does not return the owner name. Remember that. You have to, after that, add name in order to get the owner name. And it returns the entity, the owner, or null, which is a no entity. Then you have shipment price, which is a number. Returns a number, which is the price of the shipment, or returns a 0 if the shipment was not successfully found, or something like that. Then we have shipment amount. Returns the amount of the current amount inside the shipment, and returns a 0 again if the shipment if the entity is not a shipment. And then we have shipment initial amount, which turns the initial amount of weapons in the shipment. So if you have a shipment, the initial amount is going to be 10, but if you have a single, the initial amount is going to be 1, obviously. Then we have shipment weapon class, which basically just returns the weapon that the shipment has, so class. So that's going to be a string, or it returns a nil, which is an empty string. Okay, so let's get into how to implement these. So first off, we're going to take a look at how to get the entity. I have 3 different ways. You can use any of them. There's probably a lot more. I just haven't thought of them. So we find the entity by giving it an input, and we call that to trigger on the input, on the entity input. And then basically it outputs the all the variables you can get from the shipment. So name, model, owner, price, amount, initial amount, and weapons class. So let's implement this. What you can do is that you can take a ranger right here, and then basically wire the input from the E2 to the entity output on the ranger. Now if we, oops, I did not go into arms dealer. Give me a second. Now if we spawn a shipment real quick and put it in, you can see that it's going to trigger, and it's going to print in my chat name, the name of it, model, the model of it, the owner, that's me, price 50,000 for a shipment, amount 10, initial amount 10. So if I was to remove this again, take one, and then take it back, you can see that the amount is now 9, but the initial amount is still 10. Okay, that is good. Now let's take this away, remove the ranger, and then let's take a look at another way we can do this. So we can either do this that way, or we can do it as chat commands with the owner aim entity function, which basically gives you the entity that a player is looking at. Yeah, if you don't know how to use this, you can. I'm not going to explain it in this video because this is just to show the add-on, but you can go on a lot of tutorials that shows this. So basically, what it does is that if you use the .use, if you type .use in the chat, it is going to use the shipment. So this is it's print entity shipment use, and if that returns true or a 1, then it's going to say spawned one weapon from your entity shipment name. So we're combining two things there, shipment. Or if it's 0, aka false, then it's going to say failed spawning weapons. And the same goes for this, but we're just going to say spawned an amount of weapons, so the current amount in the shipment from your shipment name shipment. And if it returns 0, it's going to be failed spawned weapons. Let's put that in. Now this is my shipment. If I use .use while I look at it, it spawns a weapon, and you can see spawned one weapon from FAS Glock 20 shipment. Shipment. Okay, yeah, that's just a problem with the string name that I'm outputting. Use ship. Okay, we ran into some slight problems that when I used .use shipment, it only spawned one, but that is due to me being a stupid ass and not putting use ship in here instead of just use. So now let's try that. If I do .use ship, it spawns the whole shipment. Okay, so now that is under control. We have that. Oh yeah, this is actually a good moment to show you guys something. Now we have nine of these Glocks here. I don't know what. Oh, there's the last one. Last Glock. Now we have 10 Glocks. Now, if you spawn all the Glocks and then you put it back by holding C down and right-clicking create shipment, it's not going to be a shipment anymore. It's going to be singles. So if you do that and you want to implement it into a automatic EGP screen or something, you can't do that because then it's going to output the cost. Give me a second. If we just use the other ranger here, wire it. Oh shit. Okay. Ranger here, upload, wire, blah blah. If you put this in, you can see that the price is now 5,100 because it's a single and not a shipment, and the initial amount is 1. And since right now we created the shipment out of nothing, so it's impossible to find the owner. So in order to counter this, you just gotta use your inventory pickup, pick it up, and then drop it down again, and now it has the owner again. Okay, now that's under control. Let's look at another way we can do this. So we can also do it with key inputs. So run on keys owner. We have a table entities as a persist, and basically every single time you press the key, it takes the aim entity the owner is looking at, checks if it's a shipment. If it is, then take that entity or just do a no entity, and it adds it to the table. That's all it does. So if I now press numpad 5, you can see it says added entity blah 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 blah. And this only is outputted because if I hold down 5, it's going to trigger a lot of times. Also when I release it. Okay. So now let's take a look at another way. We can. This is to show the shipment was used functions. So in the first, if first duped means that if the E2 was just created now, or it was duplicated, so that now we are gonna create it, that's creating it. But if you upload again, it's just duplicating itself, yeah? So what I'm doing is that I'm saying shipment init was used, and then if it's true, then initialize shipment use functions, and or if it's false, then failed initialize shipment use functions. And now we're using if shipment was used as a click. Then we want to do this. So basically, if the expression2 chip was executed due to shipment was used, then we want to do this. So if you upload this, we can see if I use my shipment, and that can be any shipments. Let me just spawn a new one of any other type. Waited for it to spawn. You can see in my chat that it outputs Lucas used your FASP26 shipment. But if I use this, you can see that it's a clock shipment. Okay, so that's basically everything actually. So yeah, let me just go over this again. If you take a oh yeah, I have another E2 which basically implements everything together right here. Oops. So if I use, I use one. If I do use shipment, I use them all. And if I use shipment details, it outputs the details of the shipment. So blah 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 blah, and the initial amount is 1. And if you're having problems with the owner not being outputted, for example, if I do this, there we go, and I use .ship details, you see there's no owner, which means that if you go ahead and try and do use, it's going to say failed using shipment because I have that as a variable in my variable check, because you're not the owner of it. But if you take it in your inventory and pop it out again, oops, not destroy, pop it out, now it has me as an owner, shipment details, and I'm the owner again, and I can successfully do .use. Okay, that's everything. If you have any questions, you can contact me on the Discord whenever I'm ready, whenever I have time, obviously. Yeah, that's basically it. Have fun with the shipment E2 functions.